Hi, and welcome back to Timewalk. Tonight, our Timewalker will be walking into a castle ruled by a brutal Lord Euro, a man who made his own people live in fear. Let's follow her.
There is a city by the sea where for 300 years the world kept all of its knowledge in one building, and this morning I am walking toward its doors. They say 500,000 scrolls lived inside, every book in the world or close enough, and in one night nearly all of it burned. This is the Library of Alexandria, not a library the way we think of one, not a quiet room with borrowed books. This was a research institute, a think tank, funded by the king himself. It was called the Mouseion, the Shrine of the Muses, and it was the first place in history where smart people were paid just to think. The dream started with Alexander. When he founded this city in 331 BC, he drew the streets in the shape of a Greek cloak and told his architects the city would be the meeting point of every culture on earth. He died young, but his general Ptolemy kept the dream and made it real. Ptolemy built the Mouseion and the library and ordered every book in the world to be gathered here. All of it, he said, every single scroll. The kings of Alexandria paid for everything, salaries, rooms, meals, even servants. A scholar here did not teach, did not beg, did not work a trade, he thought. They ate together at one long table in a building they called the dining room of the Muses. Imagine a university where every professor is paid to do nothing but the best idea they can find. The kings put a scholar in charge of the whole enterprise and called him the librarian. The first was Zenodotus, who had the job of collecting, editing, and organizing everything that arrived. The greatest of them was Eratosthenes, the man who measured the earth. He ran the library for 40 years, and under him it became the beating heart of the ancient intellectual world. The library even translated the Bible. When Ptolemy II wanted the Jewish scriptures in Greek, the story says he sent for 72 scholars, 6 from each tribe, and locked them in rooms to translate the Torah. They finished in 72 days, and the result was called the Septuagint, the translation of the 70. It became the version of the Bible the whole ancient world read. That translation started here, in this building. And how did they make the books themselves? Along the Nile grew papyrus, a reed the Egyptians turned into the world's first paper, strips laid crosswise, pressed, hammered, and polished into smooth sheets. The library bought it by the ton. A single book could take 50 or 60 sheets, and the great histories took hundreds. Scrolls were the memory of the ancient world, and the Nile was where memory grew. There was even a rival library at a city called Pergamon. The kings of Alexandria were so afraid of losing their supremacy that they banned the export of papyrus, hoping to starve Pergamon of book material. It backfired beautifully. Pergamon invented parchment, writing on animal skin, and their library grew so famous that the very word parchment comes from their city's name, Pergamene. Competition, it turns out, invents. So what was a normal day here? The scholars woke early, took breakfast in the shared hall, and spent the mornings reading, copying, and arguing in the colonnades. Afternoons meant lectures and instrument rooms, and evenings meant symposia, where the king's money bought wine and conversation. Nobody clocked out. Nobody had a department to run. They just had ideas and the whole world to be curious about. And the collection itself was built with an edge. Every ship that docked in Alexandria was searched. Any scroll on board was confiscated, copied, and only the copy was returned. It was called the ship tax, and it meant the library grew faster than any collection on earth. Courtesy, it turned out, was never how empires built their shelves. Once inside, the copying was relentless. Every confiscated scroll was transcribed by hand, and the original stayed. The library did not just collect knowledge, it manufactured it. A team of copyists could produce 1,000 lines a day. Whole books were duplicated, checked, and shelved, while the ship that brought them was still unloading grain. And here is the part that still breaks my brain. In this building, one man measured the entire earth. Eratosthenes stuck a stick in the ground, watched shadows in 2 cities, and worked out the circumference to within a few %. 2,200 years ago, and he knew the planet's size without leaving Egypt. That is not trivia. That is how you know the library held the world in its hands. Euclid wrote his geometry here, the textbook that taught the world for 2,000 years. Aristarchus put the sun at the center of everything, 1,800 years before Copernicus dared. Heron built a steam engine, a toy, historians say, but a steam engine. Hipparchus mapped the stars and counted their positions with an accuracy nobody beat for 1,000 years. And the doctors here dissected human bodies, legally for the first time. Herophilus mapped the brain and the nerves, and realized the mind lives in the head, not the heart. He named the brain's parts, traced the nerves, and described the pulse. 2,000 years before modern medicine, they were already learning what bodies actually are. There was even a catalog. Callimachus wrote 120 volumes listing everything in the library with authors, titles, and first lines, the index of the entire known world. It was called the Pinax, and it was the first real library catalog in history. Find any book in any room by any author. The library was so big it needed a map of itself. And then, in the year 48 BC, a fire came to the harbor. Julius Caesar was besieged in the city, and to cover his escape he set the Egyptian fleet alight. The fire jumped from the ships to the shore. It reached the warehouses where the ship's cargo of scrolls was stored, waiting to be copied. 40,000 scrolls, gone in a night. Here is the argument historians still have. Some say the main library survived that night because the fire reached the warehouses, not the Great Hall. Others say the Great Hall burned too. What nobody argues about is the pattern. After that night, Alexandria never collected knowledge the same way again. The age of the library as the world's mind was already beginning to end. For centuries, the library limped on. Rome came and the scholars stayed, but in the year 270 the Emperor Aurelian fought a war that leveled the whole quarter where the Mouseion stood. By now the library had shrunk to a shadow of itself. The great collecting, the ship tax, the copying rooms, all of it was memory. What was left was the Serapeum, a smaller daughter library in the Temple district. Serapeum was the library's daughter, built in the temple of Serapis, the god who blended Greek and Egyptian. It held something like 42,000 scrolls, and it survived when the Mouseion did not. For 200 years after the Great Fire, this smaller library kept the flame of scholarship alive in Alexandria. And even its end came slowly, a century of neglect, then a mob, then a silence that lasted 1,000 years. And in the year 391, the Bishop Theophilus led a mob into the Serapeum and tore it apart. The temple was converted into a church. The scrolls were burned or scattered. Some say the scholars were allowed to flee. Some say they were killed. Either way, the last great library of the ancient world was gone, and the world would not see its equal for more than 1,000 years. And then there is the legend everyone remembers, the one that is probably not true. The year 642, the Arabs conquer Alexandria, and the general asks the caliph what to do with the library. The caliph's answer, the story says, was simple. If the books agree with the Quran, they are useless. If they disagree, they are harmful. Burn them. And for 6 months, they say, the baths of the city burned warm on books. Historians today are almost certain it never happened. The story only appears centuries later, and by then Alexandria was a small town. But here is the thing that matters about the legend. Whether the fire was Caesar's or Aurelian's or the bishop's or nobody's, the result is the same. The greatest library in history vanished, and what it lost no one can count. So what exactly did we lose? Let me tell you. Sophocles wrote 120 plays. 7 survive. Aeschylus wrote 90, 7 survive. Of everything the ancient world wrote, maybe 1% is left. The rest went up in those fires, or rotted in damp basements, or were scraped clean to make way for prayers. The plays, the histories, the science, the poetry, the 1% is all we have. Here is the cruelest example. Archimedes solved the problem of finding the volume of a sphere using something he called the method, a revolutionary kind of thinking, almost like calculus. The method was lost for 2,000 years. Then a scholar found it, hidden underneath a medieval prayer book, scraped over by a monk who needed parchment. The only copy in the world was a palimpsest. And here is the strangest thing about what survived. The plays we read today, the 7 Sophocles, the 7 Aeschylus, were chosen by Alexandrian scholars. Eratosthenes of Byzantium decided which versions were authentic, and his canon is what the Middle Ages copied. So the Greeks we know, the classics we were taught, are the survivors of a selection made in this building. The library did not just hold the past, it decided which past would be remembered. We measure ancient Greece through that 1%. We judge what they were, what they knew, what they believed, based on the scraps that survived. That is like judging a library by the books that happened to fall behind the shelves. Every lost scroll is a lost possibility, the medicine they had almost finished, the history that contradicted the winners, the idea that would have changed everything, that died in a fire. Today, almost nothing of the library survives above ground. You can stand in Alexandria where it stood, and the ground is just ground, the greatest building of its kind, and not one wall remains. In 2001, they built a new library on the spot, the Bibliotheca Alexandrina, a disk of glass and granite leaning toward the sea, a memory of the old one and a hope for a new one. Here is what I keep turning over, walking out of that city. Knowledge is not automatic. It does not compound by itself. Every generation has to choose to keep it. The Library of Alexandria was built by kings who taxed ships, copied books, and paid thinkers. It died when nobody did those things anymore. And everything we are today is the 1% that made it through. That is the thing about walking through history. The fire is long out, but the smoke still hangs in the air. 500,000 scrolls, one night, and the world has been quietly missing them ever since. I just got to walk through the greatest library that ever was, even if it is only a ghost now, and you came with me. Next time, I will show you what else the past has been hiding.
If this story surprised you, subscribe and ring the bell €1 every walk, every week. History's waiting, and I'll see you in the past.